everyone, and welcome to the deep dive into multiple tomato case studies using photoluminescent greenhouse films webinar presented by UbiGro. This discussion will take an in-depth look at groundbreaking tomato case studies that reveal how photoluminescent greenhouse films boost yield, efficiency, and quality across global research and commercial trials. I'm Hillary Nguyen, the Custom Content Manager for Maestro Media Worldwide, publisher of Greenhouse Grower and CE Ag World, and I'll be moderating this webinar. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Eric Moody. Eric is the VP of Sales and Marketing at UbiQD and leads the sales efforts for their brand UbiGro, bringing over 20 years of sales leadership experience and more than a decade in the horticultural lighting industry. He has a proven track record of building strong relationships with greenhouse growers across diverse crops and operations, advising on optimal lighting solutions. Eric has been a member of the UbiGro executive team for 5 years, and prior to UbiGro, he was a sales director for North America with one of the world's largest horticultural lighting companies. His deep understanding of market trend, greenhouse technologies, and grower needs positions him as a trusted leader in advancing innovative lighting solutions. At this point, I will turn the webinar over to our speaker. Eric, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Really appreciate it. Just wanted to take some time and talk a little bit about UbiQD, who we are, and our brand UbiGro, and then I'll jump into our case studies. Specifically, I picked 3 case studies for this. One that was done in conjunction with the University of Arizona and NASA, one that was done in the Netherlands with Delphy, and then finally, after those 2, we went and sought and found, luckily, a really great partner with us called Growing Opportunities, which is a tomato grower in New Mexico. And I chose these 3 specifically because they kind of tell the story of how UbiGro got to where we are today, selling our UbiGro cover product as well as our inner still. It's important to note, too, that all of these case studies I'm about ready to dive into are all with our UbiGro inner product. And what that means is, for those of you not as familiar with our product, is our inner, we refer to it as another layer of light in a greenhouse. This is a product that comes in about 4 foot or 2 foot wide sheet of plastic that you hang inside a greenhouse under your existing roof. And I think that's really key to understand that all of these case studies are done where we have sunlight coming through the exterior of a greenhouse, and then that light is passing through, again, our product, and then hitting the crop, and we were able to still show some yields. And I'll dive more into that, obviously, but I think that's really important to know. And then I also want to talk a little bit about our parent company, UbiQD. So here's a picture. This picture is a little bit older, but this was taken right behind our office in New Mexico. Our company, UbiQD, spurred out of the Los Alamos National Lab. And UbiQD is short for ubiquitous quantum dots. So basically, the parent company of UbiQD, or UbiGro, is we, at our core, are quantum dot manufacturers, and we are finding different ubiquitous ways to put quantum dots out into the world and work with them. So our divisions of our company cover solar. We're able to do basically the same thing, that very similar to what we do for horticulture. We can make sunlight more efficient for solar panels. So we work in the solar industry. We actually have a security inks division as well. Our inks are used anywhere from currencies to passports to government paperwork, but basically a security ink that can be used for identifying purposes. And then we also are, again, being part of making quantum dots ubiquitous. We are working with different companies looking at, can we coat golf balls to help them be tracked better? Can we put them in fingernail polish, which was actually one of our very early ideas. So we're working with different companies that are doing all of these different things. Basically, anywhere that we can make light, natural sunlight specifically, work better for us, we can do that with quantum dots. So part of that is what we realized is, in our efforts for sustainability and helping make the world a better place, one of the areas we looked at, of course, was controlled environment agriculture, realizing that so much of that uses natural sunlight. So what can we do to make sunlight more efficient for growers? And we know that taking our food crops and even our ornamental flowers, everything, and putting them into these controlled conditions instead of being out in typical field agriculture, we can get 20 to 50% more yield. We can use 10 times less water. We can restrict the amount of pesticides used on our crops, and we can produce year-round, protecting our crops from climate change. And in short, basically, as our climate is changing and our population is growing, we looked at how can we make growing and feeding our population more efficient with all of these changes in our growing population. So when we look at light and sunlight in particular, and we talk about making it more efficient, what does that mean for horticulture and for growing? The graph on the left, you can see is just sunlight. This is what a graph of photons, the amount of total light hitting our planet from sunlight, looks like. The graph on the right, some of you are probably very familiar with. It's been referred to as the McCree curve or the action spectrum. It's basically what plants are using from that total sunlight for photosynthesis. Now, mind you, of course, there are certain strains of plants and certain crops that are a little bit different, but the overall picture for photosynthesis, we know that the McCree curve showed us that between 400 and 700 nanometers is the most efficient for crops. And then even more efficient is specifically right around that 600 to 650 nanometer range. So that light, that red light or almost orange to the human eye, is the most efficient, even 20% more efficient than blue light, which is the second most efficient part of the light spectrum. In my early days of horticultural lighting, when LEDs first started hitting the market and becoming a viable source for horticulture, most of those were kind of purplish, pinkish hued LEDs when you looked at them, because they were really just blue and red diodes. Those two were the two most efficient diodes at the time, still are. And we kind of had this belief of, we don't need to add green. Green is the least efficient. Green is the reason why plants look green. They're reflecting green light back. So, there was this big focus on red and blue light in those early days. We've since found that that's not 100% true. And as a matter of fact, on this slide, if you look at the picture on the right of light absorption, you will see that's a cross-section of a leaf with light hitting it and different colors of light, obviously light spectrum. And you can see green light actually penetrates way, way deeper into the plant. And what we have found, and there have been studies now that have come out that show that actually green light is important for photosynthesis and crop production. We do need green light, especially helping develop lower into a dense canopy. Those, it's more green light that gets through the dense canopy, and plants are able to utilize this green light. We also know through light spectrum that we can control plant morphology. So most of you probably are aware that, a young plant, you really want to hit it with a little more heavy blue light in its young stage of growth to reduce that internodal stretch. So that stretch between the branching on the main stem, you want that to be a little thicker and shorter. We don't want it to stretch. Red light does just the opposite, especially in early plant growth. It's going to make that plant stretch. It's going to make it seek out light, if you will. And as a matter of fact, in the very, very early days of horticultural lighting, the founder of what's now PL Light Systems and originally Hortilux Schrader in Holland, the original founder of that lighting company wrote a book about basically how to trick a crop into producing its seed. And that was some of the very early days of horticultural lighting, where in the Netherlands, they started putting HPS lights into greenhouses. And the reason for that was they were able to basically, the way they described it was they were tricking that plant into thinking it's late summer, early fall, and I need to produce my fruit and drop my seed. And that's basically what happens with red light. As you increase red light onto a plant, it is telling that plant, okay, now it's time to produce my fruit, drop my seed. And that's kind of where we focus with our products for horticulture right now. So when we think about spectrum control in a greenhouse, traditionally you have these kind of four areas, if you will. You've got your supplemental lighting. Organic dyes are sometimes used in different covers. Spray-on coatings, that's really big, and especially in your big glass greenhouses, you'll see that a lot. And then colored netting. But these are different technologies than what we're talking about with what we're doing with quantum dots in greenhouse films. Especially when you look at something like the colored netting there on the right side. Yeah, it looks red, but it's not changing the light spectrum. It's really filtering out parts of the light. So it's filtering out some of the blue and the green and the other colors and only allowing red to go through, which of course increases your overall power, your overall light on your crop. So quantum dots, what are quantum dots? So that's the technology, obviously, that we're putting in our greenhouse films. And quantum dots are a nanotechnology. They are quantum at scale. They are anywhere from 10 to 50,000 times smaller than the width of a hair. We actually like to describe the size of a quantum dot. If a quantum dot were on the side of a golf ball, it would be the equivalent of that golf ball sitting on the Earth. That's how vanishingly small a quantum dot is. And what we're able to do with these quantum dots is specifically capture part of photon, a specific photon from the sun's rays that activates the quantum dot. The quantum dot is luminescent. It glows when it's activated by light. This picture, as a matter of fact, is showing different size quantum dots in a liquid form being hit with UV light. So we're able to capture specifically UV light for horticulture, and that activates our quantum dot, and it doesn't filter that UV light out. Instead, that quantum dot glows and it emits a longer wavelength photon. In the case of UbiGro, we target around 600 to 650 nanometers, right? At the height of that McCree curve to be more efficient for growing. So we're not filtering out. We're actually capturing a photon, illuminating a particle that's then emitting light on a new wavelength. So again, our company, based in Los Alamos, New Mexico, spurred out in Los Alamos National Lab. The technology, the type of quantum dot that we specifically use with UbiGro is that manufacturing and that type of quantum dot actually was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2023. Dr. Bawandi, as a matter of fact, our company has a lot of association, and some of our scientists have a direct line of contact with Dr. Bawandi. And we hold the sole license to produce this type of quantum dot, and we license it out of MIT and from Los Alamos National Lab. So that was obviously a big thing for us when we saw that announcement 2 years ago about the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. So let's take a look a little more about what our quantum dots are doing to sunlight. So again, modeling this McCree curve on the top right, we want to focus right around that 600, 625, be most efficient with the light that we can. So the graph on the left is showing you that basically across the x-axis here is your standard, your typical sunlight. And what you're seeing is the result of a quantum dot film. So we're reducing UV light by 50% or more, a little bit greater than 50%. Around 25, 23% of blue light is reduced. And we're actually increasing green, yellow, red, far red. Like all of this is actually increased. So if you look at the numbers under there, and hopefully you can see them okay, realize that those numbers look a little bit skewed because it looks like we're capturing so much UV light, over 50%, and we're adding around 11, 12% of red light. But that's relative. Sunlight already has a lot of red light, and so it already has a big amount, and we're still increasing it by 11, 12%. And that's really the big thing here, is the fact that we're able to capture this UV light that plants aren't utilizing nearly as much and producing more red. And then even blue, there's been a recent study that talks about the amount of blue light and blue saturation on plants. And sunlight actually has quite a bit more blue light than plants are actually using. I think the study, and don't quote me on this, I'd have to look it up. I'm happy to send it to anybody who wants to reach out afterwards. I can find the study. But basically it shows that once your light saturation of blue light reaches somewhere, I think it was 10 to 15% of your total light being blue light, anything more than that is excess. Your plant's not actually utilizing it. So we capture just a small amount. We still leave plenty of blue light for the plant. And mostly we're capturing a big amount of that UV and converting it over to red light. So let's jump into this technology and how it affects these couple case studies. So again, as I mentioned, our first one on tomatoes, with the University of Arizona, that wasn't our first total case study. This was our first on tomatoes. Our first study was originally done on leafy greens and lettuces with the University of Arizona. And that study was done actually before I came to work for UbiGro and UbiQD. I did know Gene Giacomelli at University of Arizona through the lighting company I was working for at the time. And I saw, online, Horty Daily and a couple other things, this post about these films increasing yield for lettuce. And I also happened to be in Holland for Green Tech Amsterdam and ran into the owner of UbiQD and UbiGro, the founder and our CEO, Hunter McDaniel, and kind of hit it off with him. We walked around that show for a while. I showed him all the different lighting companies that our company competed with and, had some good long talks. And I was really intrigued about his technology. So coming from that, see this thing with these guys, Hunter had asked me if I had any interest of changing jobs and, running the sales and marketing division for UbiGro. And at the time I was like, no. Like, I love the company I'm with. I'm going to be here forever. I'm going to retire from this company at all the things. Because I did. I worked for a really good company. And anyway, I did finally one day just decide I wanted to reach out to Gene and ask him about this product. So I did just that, emailed him. And in true form, because he knows I'm a sales guy, his first reply was, Eric, if I need lights, I'll call you. Nice soft sale, kind of attitude. So I kind of chuckled to myself, reached back out to him again. I'm like, no, I actually ran into the owner. I'm curious about the technology as a lighting guy myself. So he sent me all of his data on the lettuce trial, and I was really, really intrigued. So then combine that with the timing of all of that, and I was looking at the lighting industry on a whole for horticulture, and there was just the market was being flooded with all these LED companies coming from all over the world. And I realized, all right, this product, like Gene thinks this is a viable product, and I'm looking at it and seeing these results, and it looked pretty amazing. So go from there to this study here, and this is, again, right about when I came to work for a company, and this is what really sold me on this product, was seeing the results of this NASA and University of Arizona study. So let's dive into it. What did we find on this study, our key findings, if you will? First, if you look at the table on the top right, the little tiny boxes with the numbers in them, those are where we actually took the data from. So if you'll see, and I'll go back to the last slide, sorry, but this picture here on this slide, if you'll notice, we split right down the middle of this one row. But we realized that we don't want to take data from right next to that wall we built, because that's going to be flawed. They're getting less light. It's very shadowed. So we took our data, again, because it's a scientific study, we made sure to take our data from the very middle rows. We didn't want to be on either ends. We didn't want to be in the center because of shadowing, sun effects, stuff like that. So again, we were very careful to make sure, not us, but University of Arizona and NASA, very careful to make sure this data was, not going to be flawed in any way. So what we found, which was really amazing, if you look at the fact, again, that our film was under a greenhouse cover, so sunlight is passing through 2 layers of film, we were able to increase total fresh mass by 9%. Our marketable fresh mass, and I'll talk about the difference of that because that's really key, and you'll see that in the next study, increased 11%. We actually had an increase of fruit set per plant, so more fruits per plant of over 4%. And our total fruit weight, and it's a little bit cut off there on that slide, sorry, was almost 10%. So in summary, the film increased both number of fruits, size of fruits, which drove the 9% total gain, but full 11% improvement in marketable production. And you can see here at the bottom the details of the greenhouse, very standard greenhouse, obviously. So another factor that we saw under our UbiGro film was enhanced plant growth. So the QD film produced faster vegetative development. So our apical length, our length increased by 9%. Our leaves per plant increased by almost 5%. So these next two I think are very important. 5% more leaves per plant, and our leaf length, even though small, also increased. So again, more leaf area means more photosynthesis, faster, better, quicker production. So our growth increased linearly and consistently under our film. While there was a slight increase in leaf area, this aligns with the enhanced light capture. And really key here is the stem thickness. Even though our stem grew faster and longer, the the thickness didn't change. There was no indication of any structural weakness or a stress response to the plant. And another big finding, and you'll see this through all of our case studies, is our light use efficiency was up a lot. So our fresh mass light use efficiency versus dry mass, obviously two different things, but our fresh mass, which is what's important to growers, increased 11%. Or light use efficiency was 11% increase, basically meaning taking the same amount of sunlight, which this case study, they were very careful to make sure we had the same amount of micromoles on each side. With the same amount of light, we produced more. So basically our light use efficiency, using the same amount of light, we're producing more. So we basically were 11% more efficient with natural sunlight than under the control. So when you look at the full conclusion on this, you see that our yield increased significantly from 9 to 11%. Plants grew stronger, faster, had more leaf area. Our light use efficiency was up 11%. Important to note that, because I get asked this a lot, temperature, DLI, all of that remained unchanged. Our film didn't change the temperature measured, in the greenhouse and at the leaf itself. We did not change. But our fruit quality and marketability increased. And you'll see that more on the next one as well, because that obviously triggered some thoughts, and we wanted to make sure we studied this closer. And then we had no negative physiological responses were observed. So this study, again, first one on tomatoes, it kind of provided that evidence that, okay, we're on to something. Let's go to a little bigger scale. Let's see what we can do next. And quite frankly, the next one, sorry, my slides are moving a little bit slow on my end. The next one we did was at Delphy in the Netherlands. And this one, to be quite honest, made me nervous, because if you know anything about tomato growers in Holland, they are maximizing that plant better than probably anybody in the world. From CO2 to, their supplemental lighting, all of the things, like they push the plant to the max. So this one was making me a little nervous, because I'm like, okay, what can we do to a plant that's already being pushed to the max? Can we see improvements here? So let's dive in. I'll show you the results on that one as well. We did see improvements. We saw a 5.7% improved saleable production yield. And important to note the saleable production. And in this test, because, let me jump back. I forgot to mention one thing. If you look at this picture, just so we're clear, this is not us as the cover. This is UbiGro film, basically up against the glass of already a glass greenhouse. So sunlight is traveling through the glazing, the glass of the greenhouse, and then traveling through our product. So you'll notice on this first key finding here, we had a 5% improved saleable yield, and 14% lower PAR transmission. So we had less light, but higher yield, less sunlight, that is. And what we found with that was we were 23% more efficient with the use of light. So our light use efficiency increased from 6.7 to 8 grams per mole. So 8 grams of tomatoes per mole of light. That's a 23% increase. We had 10% faster vegetative growth. At this time in our company, when we were looking at crops that we thought would be, most beneficial under UbiGro, we were looking at, your higher value crops, tomatoes, even cannabis, fruit bearing crops. What we have found recently, and if you've seen some of our other webinars, are ornamental growers and flower growers are actually loving that fact right there, the 10% faster vegetative growth. You think about an ornamental grower who's getting ready for, Mother's Day, Easter, those things. If he can get his product, or she can get their product to the shelf 10% faster than their competitor, that's a huge win for them, right? That's all about fighting that shelf space in the retail market. So that's a really big win across all crops, the 10% faster vegetative growth. And again, leaves were 9.5% longer. So again, seeing more increased photosynthesis. But the big one, as I mentioned in the last study, we had a 36% reduced tomato waste under our film. So that's a really, really big increase. And that's one of the reasons we had this 5% increase in yield, is because we had so much less waste. So what we found was the film increased both saleable production by 5.7%. It made light 23% more efficient, and reduced waste by that big number of 36%. At the bottom, again, are just some notes on the greenhouse itself. You can see a pretty standard high-tech greenhouse in the Netherlands. So talk about our yield for a minute. Again, while that last slide I showed 5% saleable production, realize our total yield was only 2.2% more. But again, that's with 14% less light. So that's actually a really big number. You think 2% doesn't seem like a lot, but if you've got 14% less light and you're still producing more, because, you take a graph of the amount of light on a tomato crop, it's pretty linear. As your amount of light goes down, your yield goes down, or vice versa, goes up with more light. So to have 14% less light and still have 2.2% total yield production is a really big number. Again, the reason for that is our light use efficiency was increased so much. So at the bottom, you'll see kind of a summary of that, but there's notes. Because of the lower light levels inside the film compartment, less production would typically be seen than in the reference or the control compartment. But the plants under our foil have such a higher light use efficiency, we're able to produce more fruit with lower levels of light. So this, to me, was a huge, huge win. And, 5% doesn't sound really big, but if there's any large tomato growers on here, a 5% increase in your yield is a huge, huge benefit. So moving forward, again, these pictures are a little bit deceiving. The picture on the top right does look like it's almost, the glass itself, but this is our film just against the glass. But other enhancements that we saw was, again, vine length growth. We had 9.4%, so almost 10% elongation. The plants grew 2.1 centimeters more per week under our film, so definitely growing faster. And again, leaf length bigger again as well. So again, that enables more photosynthesis. But the big one, like I said, was the decrease in weight. So while our temperature was being monitored to stay the same, one of the things they also made us aware of was due to orientation and everything else, and the fact that not from light changing, but because under our film, we basically had another layer in there, so it just made more insulating factor with an extra layer of our inner, so they had to vent our side a little bit more. But in doing so, that meant we had a slightly lower CO2 level in there as well. So when they dove into those numbers for us at Delphy, they calculated that the impact of the loss of what was approximately 23 parts per million of CO2, that should have been a loss of about 0.5 to 1.6% total growth or yield. And we did not obviously see that. We still had an increase. So not only were we 14% less light, but we were 23 parts per million less CO2, and we still saw an increase. And again, the big part of that increase was the 36% waste reduction. And, we're still kind of figuring out what the reason is for that. We haven't pinpointed exactly. I think a lot of it has to do with less time on the vine, and there's other factors that can contribute to, why there would be less waste. But yeah, that was a big part of that. And that's been something we've seen in almost every tomato case study we've had, is that waste is down under our films. So again, overall conclusions on this case study: 5.7% improved saleable production, nearly identical total fruit biomass, really 2.2 or so percent more under the UbiGro, but all of that done with 14% less par. We had a 23% higher light use efficiency, 10% faster vegetative growth, 36% reduction in tomato waste. And all of this was with stable temperature and climate conditions. So again, there's a note there about CO2, but I think I've already covered that. But again, another big home run for us. As I mentioned at the beginning of this one in particular, I was pretty worried because, this is a very high-tech greenhouse. What can we do for a greenhouse this high-tech? And for us to have a 5.7 improvement was very, very big. So knowing that, we said, okay, now it's time to go to an actual farmer. Luckily for us, we have a great tomato farmer really close to us called Growing Opportunities, really close to our office in New Mexico. Has about 16,000 square feet of double wall poly greenhouse. And we're ready to put it in a real world test and see how it does for us. So we did a 5-month summer trial of our films there, and we'll dive into this one next. So again, this greenhouse, if you look at the bottom of this slide, the greenhouse setup, we've got a 30 by 90 greenhouse that he allowed us to put our films in. He's already got a whitewash double wall poly because the summer light intensity, obviously in New Mexico, is very high, but it's not as high tech as Delphy. He's, again, double wall poly, no supplemental lighting. We made sure that all fertigation, pruning, harvest procedures, everything was exactly the same under our films versus under the control. We tested, 2 test rows, and we had a control row, but we made sure there were, again, barriers in between those, so there was no light cross-contamination. Total of 252 plants were tested, 126 each. And you can see the results in the top right per month. And you'll notice every month we did a little bit better. Well, not every month, I'm sorry. There was one month at the very beginning where the control was just slightly outperforming us, but remained the same. But you'll see as the light intensity got more, we really took off. And that's when we saw our biggest benefit here. But overall, we had a 20.5% fresh weight increase. UbiGro films produced a consistent yield enhancement in 4 of 5 straight months, with especially strong gains again in June and July. So also, again, important to note that the control is double wall poly greenhouse. So sunlight is traveling through 2 layers of poly greenhouse cover. And then under our film side with the tomatoes, you're going through 2 walls of poly and our film. So again, with every study, we tracked that light use efficiency. And just like in the last 2 studies, we had a 20.5% yield increase under identical climate and nutrient conditions. So our light use efficiency was, again, of course, up. And we realized that, our films, the spectral quality reaching the canopy is just higher. Photons and overall efficiency per unit of available sunlight increased. I'm getting a notification that is everybody hearing me okay and seeing our slides okay? Got a notification that my internet might have lagged out. So hopefully everybody's hearing me okay right now. So one of our crucial finding with this one of the crucial findings we have in this case study is, again, we showed that temperature was not affected at all. So on the side of the greenhouse that had our films, we were measuring temperature in the greenhouse and at the leaf level, and we were not seeing any changes at all. But it definitely highlighted that our yield gains come entirely from the improved light spectrum and not from any sort of microclimate effects. Oops, sorry. So in conclusion, on this study, we found, again, very similar to the last ones, but higher increase, so 20.5% increase. And again, this is because this is not as high-tech of a greenhouse. He doesn't have artificial lighting, but because our light use efficiency was so high, we were able to help him by over 20% yield increase. We had earlier and more consistent production peaks, no impact on temperature or greenhouse climate, high durability and stable photon conversion. And we also had higher profit per square foot, and we'll talk about that here at the bottom. our economic impact for growers. So when working with this grower, he shared his data with us that his typical average annual production for this farm is 29,750 pounds. At a wholesale price, he sells at $250 per pound. So his baseline greenhouse revenue is $74,000 per year. But under our film, if you calculate that across what he would see across this full farm, that 20.5% yield increase would add over $15,000 a year in revenue. $12,000 per year of that would be profit after you take out the costs of putting in the films. So basically in 4 years, which is approximately the life expectancy of our film, he would see about a $51,000 increase in added profit. And if you look at the pictures there to the right, you'll see that is not our inner film. He was also our very first customer to try our new UbiGro cover, where we're now able to put our quantum dots into a poly cover. In this particular one, we decided to put our poly on the outside layer. We typically recommend it to be the inside layer of a double wall poly because there is some reflective value from that outside layer. And it's also obviously going to be a more expensive poly. So we want to, if you can keep it protected as an inside layer, that's great as well. But this was, one of our first production runs with our UbiGro cover. This product was seamed to fit the width because it was made on a smaller machine. And that seam, the way it was seamed, we were worried it would have a little drip line in there of condensation. So we made sure to put it on the outside with this grower, just to make sure that didn't happen. And you can see the picture of one of my counterparts standing in the greenhouse. And what I really want to point out is, and I've had people say this a couple of times now, that when you walk into a greenhouse covered with our UbiGro product, you feel like it looks to the eye anyway, like you're in a grow that has a whole lot of HPS, high pressure sodium lighting in there, because you can see the color in that picture with him standing there. It's very orange heavy, obviously. So where do we go from here? What's next for UbiGro? We have just started manufacturing our UbiGro cover. It's limited production right now. We can't really even keep up right now with the amount of orders we have coming in, which is a great thing for us. But if you followed along, especially with our parent company, UbiQD, on any of our press releases or social media, you will see that in the past year, the parent company, UbiQD, we just went through a Series B fundraise. We raised $20 million to help us with the growth of across all of our brands. So that includes obviously UbiGro, which is a big focus of our company right now. And on top of that, we just closed in the past couple of weeks a financing agreement with Silicon Valley Bank to help us basically to ramp up production. So we are ramping up production because what's been our bottleneck is just the production of quantum dots. So we are now, as our production ramps up, we are getting every other quantum dot, a couple there are in the world, none of which manufacture the specific type of dot we do, but we will be the world's largest manufacturer of quantum dots with these investments. And that's going to help us be able to produce enough plastic to cover the world at that point. But one of the couple other areas that we are looking at is what you see here. Did kind of use that picture from Delphy in the right because it looks like glass, but the small little greenhouse on the left, that was a study just recently done between the USDA and UC Davis. We worked with the two of them and did a study on some leafy greens in a glass covered greenhouse. So that's a laminate glass. So our quantum dots are still not plastic, but they're the plastic film that's between two layers of glass. So laminate glass, just like the windshield of your car is laminate. It's a more stout glass, so it's a little sturdier. We've done that, made some glass, put it in this greenhouse, and they just went through their first round of growth. We had tremendous results. You'll see that case study coming out soon, and we're now pushing for phase 2 of that product with the USDA to see if we can't get into a real world situation in the big farm. So that's one area we're looking to expand. Another area is with deployables and shade film. We're looking at being in kind of weaving our product into a woven shade cloth that can be deployable over a greenhouse. So got a couple different ideas of different ways we can incorporate our technology into greenhouses for different types of greenhouses and different growers. So yeah, that's all I've got on those. I think we're going to open it up to questions now. My contact info is here on the screen. I'm Eric at UbiGro. Feel free to reach out to me. It's our office number there as well. And then I think we were going to take some questions if we had time still.
And we do have some. Great presentation. Thanks, Eric. So let's just dive into the questions. So does this mean that we can keep production going longer through the winter, even though light levels are lower, since we are utilizing a higher percentage of the total light?
So great question. I do get asked this a lot, especially from like my old colleagues in the lighting industry. They like to say, "Oh, you're like a competitor," but not really. We can't extend daylight, right? So we only work when the sun is shining on us. But in the winter, like we've done some tests in like Cresco, Iowa with Plant Peddler, if you're familiar who they are. They saw some great results. We're in a couple farms in Michigan right now. Not a lot of winter sun in those areas, but when the sun is lower in the sky, that's actually when you can see our product glowing more because there's not as bright a light above you. And where we were originally thinking we really need to be focusing on, more equatorial, high light level areas, we're finding that we're able to help growers with low light as well, because we're, again, making that sunlight more efficient. So as long as you're still getting sunlight, we're going to make it more efficient for you as well. So I do think we can help growers in the winter as well. I think you'll see a benefit from it for sure.
Hey, what is the film thickness and weight at 1,000 square foot? I think is the question.
I'm not sure the weight off the top of my head. It is an 8 mil. I think most greenhouse plastics are 6 mil, but this is an 8 mil film, so it is going to feel a little bit thicker, our cover anyway. Our inner product, which is a much thicker product, it's a stiffer product. It's made to hang and kind of lay on the trusses of a greenhouse. But our cover product is a little bit thicker. And I say that understanding we are working on a 6 mil variation as well. And we just passed some tests that are going to push towards that. But right now, currently, it's an 8 mil plastic.
Does the Q film diffuse light transmission?
Yes, that's actually a great point. And I meant to talk about that. Our film is very, very high diffusion of light. And as a matter of fact, we have some other case studies that show this on our website. One specifically I'm thinking of is a cannabis case study where a grower did not have good light diffusion at all. This grower saw, I don't think that might not be a case study. I'm just telling you a story, I know. But I did work with a grower in California who, very old greenhouse. It was an old flower greenhouse. They tried our inner film. And I actually have pictures of this where you can look down the aisleway. That's where our film was not covering their crop, and you could see the dark shadows under it. But then when you got under our film and you took that same picture, same time of day, those shadows are blurred out because it is our quantum dots emit light in all directions. So they very, very much diffuse it. And you'll see those shadows look very softer, very similar to what the dimpled reflector of a high pressure sodium light does. It really gets photons bouncing around and diffuses light really well. So that was a great question, and thank you for reminding me of that.
Does it need to get taken down in the winter?
Our greenhouse cover works just like any other greenhouse cover. So if you're growing with a poly greenhouse now and you're taking your poly down in the winter, you would do the same thing with poly. But no, it's meant to be used year round and stay up. Our inner product would stay up year round. You would keep it up, because it's inside the greenhouse under the existing cover. But our greenhouse cover, our poly product, is the same as any other poly in the industry.
Is it possible to use UbiGro as a form of shade, or is there a shade cloth available?
Yeah, so I did mention that briefly earlier. We are working on this. This is something that we see down the road. Now that we were able to put it into a poly, we believe we can slit that enough to weave it into a woven fabric shade cloth to make it deployable, because we see that as well. There are times, you might want your plants to have a little added red light, and there's times you might not. So to have a deployable product that can go out, especially when the very, very, peak season of summer and the sun's at its highest, that would be ideal. So we are working on that, just not quite there.
Will you ever have a blue light version of UbiGro?
Oh, great question. I'd say the short answer is yes. So we are working on some of these in other industries right now. So again, we're capturing UV light and converting it to blue light within that PAR region, if you will. And once we have that recipe for that quantum dot really dialed in, that we can produce it on a large scale, I could see a blue version of UbiGro coming very soon. But again, it's very much would be in its infancy right now. I'd say that's probably a few years away.
Why was there such a large reduction in wasted product in the Delphy study?
So that's something we are definitely looking into. And I mentioned this a little bit. There's a couple different things that can cause waste. The length on the vine, light intensity, even high UV light can cause misshapen fruit and can cause cracking in a fruit. So some of the light diffusion that we're doing definitely could be something that's helping reduce waste, being that there's not that direct sunlight, beating really hard in specific parts of the crop. So I think it's a combination of our diffused light and the fact that we can see about 10% less time on the vine. The more time your fruit sits on the vine, the more chance it has to, have soft spots or bad areas of the skin. So I believe it's a combination of those two, but that's something we're definitely studying more to make sure, our thoughts are correct on that.
Looks like this might be the last one. Are you currently looking for more commercial studies with actual growers? And if so, how do we go about finding more information?
Yes, love that. Definitely we are. Obviously we've done a lot. If you look at the case studies on our website, you'll see a ton of leafy greens and tomatoes. But like strawberries, we had a great improvement, over 20% increase in strawberries, but that was done very small tabletop scale. Like I'd love to find a big berry grower, strawberry, raspberries, blueberries. Like we want to go to the larger scale with different fruits. So we're always looking for more data. We are a very data focused company. So the more data we have on different types of crops in different regions, we're always looking for partners, especially somebody that can provide, an identical control versus, a test under ours. That's a huge leap for us. And we're always looking for help with that. And then we do offer, better pricing for that as well. So if we have somebody that, looks like they'd be a great partner to help us get some good results and maybe publish a case study, we work with them to give them the best pricing and do what we can to make sure it works for everybody.
Okay. Oh, it looks like we've got one more that just came in. Removing large fractions of UV and blue light is known to reduce biosynthesis of flavonoids, important to human health. How do you reconcile the loss in nutrition with the increase in yield?
Great question. And that is something we have had, and I think I might have skipped over that. I think there was a note in one of those slides. It was probably pretty small, but we've tested for bricks, nutrients, all of that under our product. And it has not been reduced at all. We've seen no change at all. It hasn't increased, but it hasn't reduced. And the reason being is we're not removing too much of the UV or blue. We're still allowing UV and blue light to hit the crop. So it's not shut out totally. It's still getting there. And we're still able to test for it and know that we haven't altered that in any way. But that is a really good question.
And one more. Are you looking at single layer high tunnel use?
Oh, yes. We have some out there already. And definitely, I know we've got a partner in Mexico that's getting ready to do some of those for us as well. So we are always looking for that as well. I think that would do really, really well with UbiGro.
Okay, that does look like it's the last question. So thank you all for attending today's webinar. A special thank you to UbiGro for presenting it, and to our speaker, Eric Moody, for sharing valuable insights from case studies demonstrating how photoluminescent greenhouse films enhance tomato production, boosting yield, light efficiency, and growth rate while reducing waste. If you want to watch this webinar on demand or revisit certain parts, it will be archived and available at the same link you used to access it today. You'll also receive an email reminder of the archive with the link tomorrow. Thank you again for joining us. This concludes the webinar.